Well, thank you for that lovely, lovely introduction and welcome. So kind of you. And good afternoon, everyone, and happy breastfeeding week. It's a special thank you to Dr. Elizabeth Carthan McQuinn and Dr. Sarah Brennan of INUI Galway and the HSD for their kind invitation to me to introduce this webinar to mark Breastfeeding Week. You're all so welcome, as you've been told, to this very important event. The theme of the webinar, Diverse Global Perspectives on Breastfeeding and Breastfeeding Support, could not be better chosen in the light of this time in history when the world is facing so many challenges as well as the dreadful crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. Congratulations on the lineup of wonderful participants. It's so good that besides our own eminent specialists here in Ireland, we have so many international and distinguished experts, and we are so lucky that they have agreed to be part of the webinar. It is heartwarming and hopeful that there is a distinct awareness in all the contributions that this issue of breastfeeding is not just individual, that it is societal, cultural, international, and planetary. The different aspects of the subject that each speaker deals with, which are affirming of one another, and will no doubt add to our further understanding and knowledge, and our resolve to do all in our power to bring about the happy day, as Beckett says, that every child on the planet can be breastfed by a well-nourished mother. Even as we deal with the immediate issue, we must always keep before our mind the purpose of achieving the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, to which 200 countries have signed up. 5 of these global goals deal directly with the empowerment of women and also with the ending of poverty, malnutrition, and inequality, and achieving sustainable economic growth universally. The United Nations is the great and best hope of the world, but it needs support. It needs the financial pledges given to be honoured. I just wish that its worth were better known, and if the sub-bodies of the United Nations were referred to with the whole of saying the United Nations World Health Organization, the United Nations Children Education Fund, United Nations UNESCO, so as people would make that connection and understand how important the United Nations is to us. The United Nations have said that the smartest investment for families, communities, and countries can make is breastfeeding. And it is so great to have Dr. Rigel Rowlands of the Department of Maternal, Newborn, Child, and Adolescent Health at the United Nations World Health Organization as a participant in the seminar today. That's wonderful. I find it very exciting that the beautiful term human milk is referred to and occurs in the work of so many of the speakers. It is so fundamental to our being. When one thinks of the millions of years of intelligence and intuition and instinct it took nature to evolve species that for the survival of their offspring reached a stage of mammal, and eventually then human beings that could carry their young inside their body and then continue to feed it with milk once it had been given birth. How extraordinary that this miracle of creation, that birthright of a baby to its mother's milk, should have been perversely thrown away as it says in some poem, as if it were a careless trifle. It's so wonderful that you people here and the other scientists like you and the research at the United Nations have scientifically proven and continue to add to the evidence that there is no greater gift to a baby for its health and happiness than to be nursed exclusively on its mother's milk for the first 6 months of his life, then being able to be fed solids and being continued to part breastfeed for as long as the mother wishes. The task is to get that understanding to come about universally. There's no substitute. Here in Ireland, 40 years ago, children were breastfed, and 30 years later, almost all babies were bottle fed. It had become the norm. The midwives had disappeared, and nurses and doctors in hospitals never mentioned the possibility of breastfeeding. La Leis League were the only advocates, and what a serendipity that Dr. Elizabeth McCarthy, one of the organisers of today's events, has been a leader of La Leis League internationally for 30 years. Now, how did that cultural change come about? Was it in part because of the power of advertising of formula? Well, the cultural change to breastfeeding, back to breastfeeding in Ireland, is slowly and surely on its way through the great commitment of so many health interests and concerned groups, and not least the great pioneering breastfeeding women of La Cuidiu, La Leis League, Friends of Breastfeeding, and others who are all helping other women to understand and to help them through this time. It is vital that we get public acceptance of breastfeeding. We get well-paid maternity leave and flexible working conditions, optimum professional support combined with community support programs for new mothers, private and comfortable breastfeeding and expressing facilities in workplaces, shopping centres, universities, airports, and many other places that women have to be. These are all vital if we are to make it possible for women to breastfeed exclusively for 6 months and then go on to solids and continue breastfeeding for as long as they wish. I thank you all, and I find it's a wonderful thing to be present at this webinar, and I thank you for commitment to increasing the frequency of breastfeeding amongst mothers around the world, and I wish you a fruitful and successful webinar. Thank you all.